This is a true story. In 1953, a small town in Japan faced something truly unexplainable. It started with the cats. Over 50,000 of them, yes, 50,000, unexpectedly rushed toward the sea and vanished without explanation. But that was only the beginning. Not long after, over 10,000 people in the town started showing strange symptoms. They seemed confused, like they weren't in control of their own actions. Doctors ran tests, but no one could figure out what was going on. The townspeople grew increasingly concerned. Some speculated about a mysterious cause, while others decided to leave. What could cause something like this? What happened in this town? Step into T.C channel, where every brain-bending mystery unfolds, one clue at a time. Don't just watch, subscribe now and challenge yourself to crack the case. Our story takes place in Kumamoto Prefecture, Japan, in a small town called Mizuo. In 1953, the Tanaka family lived there, a quiet family with 2 young daughters. One ordinary day, the girls were playing outside, when they noticed their cat acting strangely. It was stumbling, its legs shaky and unsteady. And then, it suddenly fell to the ground. After a few moments, the cat got back up, but this time, it moved like it was following some strange, invisible rhythm. What was going on? Dad! Come here! The younger daughter called out. Look! Our cat is dancing. Her father, amused, came outside and said, A dancing cat? Don't be silly, but when he got closer, his smile faded. The cat's behavior wasn't funny anymore. Its mouth was frothing slightly, its movements became erratic, and then it started shaking, letting out strange, unusual noises. It fell again, trembling on the ground. And then, suddenly, the cat bolted toward the sea. It moved as if something was pulling it, like it had no choice. The Tanaka family lived right by the coast, and they could only watch, as their cat leaped into the water. A moment later, it appeared on the surface, drifting slowly, until it disappeared into the distance. Cats are usually terrified of water, but this one? It suddenly bolted straight into the sea. The little girl's mom came outside, startled, and said, Do you think the cat might have eaten something it shouldn't have? That would explain why it's acting so strange. At first, that seemed like the most logical explanation, but the very next day, their neighbor's cat started behaving the exact same way. It had the same weird symptoms. Then, just like the first one, it ran straight to the sea and disappeared. Now the entire village was spooked. There was no way every cat could have eaten the same thing. Something about this just didn't make sense. Before long, word spread like wildfire. People started calling it cat syndrome, and then things grew even stranger. Within a year, over 50,000 cats in the town, yes, 50,000, all started showing the same symptoms. One by one, they ran to the sea and vanished. The village was left without a single cat. It was eerie, unsettling, like something straight out of a mysterious story. That's when an elder stepped forward and said, This isn't natural. The sea spirits must be warning us about our actions. The idea sent chills through the town. 50,000 cats? Gone? This wasn't just strange, it was deeply unsettling. Someone finally suggested, let's call in an expert, someone who can deal with things like this. So they brought in a renowned expert in mysterious events, someone famous for handling unexplained phenomena. When the expert arrived, they asked, Where was the first cat from? The villagers pointed to the Tanaka family. Take me there, the expert said. At the Tanaka home, the expert walked around the yard, carrying a specialized instrument for their investigation. After a long pause, they said, This family has attracted something strange, something perhaps even harmful. Then, they performed a cleansing process, intended to drive out whatever was causing the chaos. When the process was done, the expert packed up and left. But not long after that, even the dogs and pigs in the village started acting strangely. Their behavior was so unusual, it left everyone deeply confused. Pigs behaving oddly near the sea? That sounded ridiculous, but their other symptoms matched the cats perfectly. The villagers were completely baffled. They started whispering among themselves, Could the expert we hired have made things worse? As the situation continued to spiral, even animals that had never shown any signs before were now affected. In desperation, the villagers rushed back to the spiritual expert. Please, you have to tell us, what's going on? Weren't you supposed to stop this? Why is it spreading instead? The expert let out a deep sigh and said, It's not that my rituals failed. I believe the Tanaka family may have triggered something far beyond human understanding. This force is too strong for me to handle alone. You'll need to find someone with greater expertise to end this." With those words, everyone's attention turned to the Tanaka family. And then, something shocking happened to their eldest daughter. The Tanakas had 2 daughters, and the eldest, Shizuko, was outside early one morning, watering the flowers. Out of nowhere, she suddenly collapsed to the ground. Her body began trembling violently, as if she had no control over it. She started mumbling incoherently, her words slurred and completely unintelligible. It was as if she wasn't even aware of what was happening to her. Her parents froze in shock, falling to their knees, crying out, "What's wrong with her?" Wasting no time, they rushed her to the best hospital in town. The hospital's director, Dr. Hosokawa, was in his office working on some paperwork, when a doctor burst in, looking alarmed. "Director, you need to see this right away. We've just admitted Tanaka's eldest daughter, Shizuko, and her condition is unlike anything we've seen before. It seems like an illness, but it doesn't match any known symptoms." We're completely stumped. Dr. Hosokawa felt a chill run down his spine. If it's not an illness, then what could it be? He quickly made his way to the patient's room, but the moment he saw her, he froze. Shizuko's body was tense and positioned unnaturally, and the pain on her face was unmistakable. The hospital wasted no time. They immediately called for an emergency meeting, bringing together experts from every department: pediatrics, psychiatry, internal medicine, and surgery. The room buzzed with tension, as the doctors debated and speculated. No one has ever seen anything like this before. What could possibly be causing it? After hours of discussion, they still couldn't come up with an answer. With no other options, they decided to treat her for epilepsy, at least as a temporary solution. That afternoon, Tanaka came back again. This time, it was his younger daughter. She had the exact same symptoms as her older sister, but because she was so young, her condition was far worse. She had already fallen into a deep coma, her body trembling slightly, her joints visibly stiff. She was just a little girl. Her family rushed her to the ER, and the doctors did everything they could to save her. But the doctors couldn't turn things around. A month later, more children in the village started showing the same symptoms. Their health went downhill fast. Some even lost their eyesight, while others faced serious health complications. This mystery illness was spreading rapidly across the village. Call it a disease, call it something unknown, it didn't matter anymore. All anyone knew was that it wasn't slowing down. Within just a few months, over 20 more children got sick, all from the same small town, and every single one of them was a child. The pattern was impossible to ignore, and the village descended into chaos. It didn't take long for the blame to fall on Tanaka's family. "It's them, it has to be. They must have done something terrible to bring this upon us. We can't let this go on." Fear had gripped the entire village. Parents were helpless as their children got sick, one after another. They could only watch them struggle with the illness, and in some cases, their health deteriorated beyond recovery. That fear, that hopelessness, it turned into anger, and that anger was aimed straight at Tanaka's family. At that moment, Tanaka was at home, trying to prepare for the funerals of his 2 daughters. Suddenly, a group of villagers showed up at his house, their frustration spilling over. They pointed fingers at Tanaka, yelling, "What did you do? Why are our kids suffering because of you?" Tanaka froze, shocked and confused. "I didn't do anything," he said, his voice shaking. Just then, the village mayor arrived. He walked up to Tanaka, his voice calm but serious. "Tanaka, I know you're grieving, and I know you've lost your daughters. I'm so sorry for your loss. But things in this village are out of control. Too many children are sick, and everyone is terrified. For the sake of the village, I think it's best if you leave. This isn't about blame, but people won't feel safe as long as you're here." Tanaka's face turned red with anger. "My daughters are gone. And now you're telling me this is my fault," he shouted. The mayor sighed. "We don't know what's causing this, but fear spreads quickly. If you stay, it's only going to make things worse. Please, understand where we're coming from." The villagers weren't satisfied. Someone in the crowd yelled, "We can't let him stay. He needs to leave." The crowd erupted again, and chaos filled the room. At that moment, a calm voice broke through the noise. Everyone turned to look. It was Dr. Hosokawa, the head of the hospital. He had treated Tanaka's daughters, along with many of the other sick children. He stepped forward, calm and composed, and immediately took control. "Everyone, listen to me," he said firmly. "This has nothing to do with curses or evil spirits. We need to put our trust in science." His voice was steady, but it carried a sense of compassion. I know how scared you all are, and I understand what you're feeling. But fear and anger aren't going to solve this. I promise you, I'll do everything I can to figure out what's causing this, and I'll do my best to help these children recover. But I need your support, and I need you to stay calm. That's the only way we're going to get through this. Slowly, the villagers began to calm down. They still had doubts, but their trust in the doctor gave them a reason to back away. Back then, people still trusted doctors. But the problem was, getting an appointment, nearly impossible. Most people didn't even get the chance to see one. Dr. Hosokawa and his team stayed in Mizuo, working around the clock to figure out what was happening. But before they could uncover any answers, things took a turn for the worse. At first, it was only children showing these strange symptoms. Then, the elderly started to fall ill too. Not long after, even young adults began to experience the same issues. It spread fast, like nothing anyone had ever seen before. More people got sick every day, and the symptoms just kept getting worse. In just over a year, out of 40,000 residents, more than 10,000 showed these bizarre symptoms. That's a quarter of the town. At its worst, the streets were unsettling to see, people stumbling as they walked, their expressions twisted in ways that didn't seem normal. Word spread quickly about Mizuo, and fear gripped the neighboring villages. If someone said they were from Mizuo, people avoided them at all costs, as if they were carrying something infectious. Out of fear, many Mizuo residents packed up their lives and left, abandoning the town, leaving it empty and hauntingly silent. Dr. Hosokawa knew this wasn't something he could handle alone. He reported everything to the Kumamoto prefecture government. But to his shock, their response was cold and indifferent. "We've received your report," they said. "We'll begin looking into it." And that was it. No follow-up, no urgency, no solutions. Frustrated and left with no choice, Hosokawa decided to press on by himself. Months passed, but despite his relentless efforts, he found nothing. The stress was taking its toll. He was exhausted, barely holding it together. One day, he rode his bike along the coastline near Mizuo, hoping to find some kind of clue. As he pedaled, he noticed a water bird flying in the distance. It soared gracefully, but then, out of nowhere, it dropped straight into the water, floating lifelessly on the surface. Hosokawa froze. A chill ran down his spine. He stopped his bike, jumped off, and ran toward the bird. When he reached it, it was completely still, dead, with no signs of struggle or injury. He looked around, and then he saw it, a small, hidden cove nearby. It was tucked away, impossible to see unless you were standing right there on the shore. Curious, he walked closer. And then, he stopped in his tracks. The water in the cove was filled with dead fish and birds. Many of them had washed ashore, scattered across the sand like remnants of a storm. Hosokawa stood there, stunned. His mind raced. What could have caused this? For a moment, he couldn't help but think, could this really be some kind of curse? But he quickly shook off the thought. No, he told himself, there has to be an explanation. The answer to Mizuo's mystery is somewhere here. It has to be. Hosokawa started collecting the bodies of the dead animals, sending them to a specialized lab for testing. When the results came back, he was floored. Every single animal tested positive for dangerously high levels of heavy metals. And it wasn't just one or two, multiple heavy metals were far beyond safe limits. This wasn't a coincidence. These animals weren't just dying, they were dying because of environmental contamination. Hosokawa had a theory. Could it be the seawater? He collected samples from the nearby bay, and when the results came back, his worst fears were confirmed. The water was loaded with heavy metals, far exceeding any safe threshold. The more he investigated, the more the pieces started falling into place. People living near the coastline? Their illness rates were sky high. But those further inland? Barely any cases at all. Hosokawa needed to dig deeper. He searched for a family that had somehow avoided the outbreak. Finally, he found one. Not a single person in this household had fallen ill. What was their secret? The answer was shockingly simple. They didn't eat fish. This was the breakthrough Hosokawa had been looking for. The illness wasn't random, it was directly tied to seafood. Contaminated fish and shellfish were at the heart of this mysterious outbreak. But one question still loomed large. Where was the contamination coming from? Hosokawa's investigation led him to a small, hidden bay near Mizuo. And just beyond the bay, he found it, a massive chemical plant operated by Japan Nitrogen Fertilizer Company. The factory was producing vinyl chloride, a common industrial chemical. Its production required mercury as a catalyst. But instead of safely treating its wastewater, the factory released untreated wastewater into the bay. The water became saturated with mercury. Fish and shellfish in the bay absorbed it, and inside their bodies, the mercury transformed into methylmercury, a highly toxic compound that could cause severe harm even in small amounts. Over time, the people of Mizuo unknowingly ate massive amounts of contaminated seafood. The buildup of toxins in their bodies led to the strange, devastating illnesses that had taken over the town. And it wasn't just humans. Even pigs and dogs started showing symptoms. Why? Fish scraps, heads, guts, and other leftovers were being turned into livestock feed. But grass-eating animals like cows and sheep? They were completely unaffected. Finally, Hosokawa pieced everything together. He compiled all his findings, the lab results, patient case studies, and his analysis, into a detailed report. He was ready to hand it over to the government. But the morning he planned to leave, there was a knock at his door. 3 men stood outside. The man in charge carried a leather suitcase. Without saying a word, he walked in, placed the suitcase on the table, and opened it. Inside, it was packed with cash. The man finally spoke. "Dr. Hosokawa, I think you know why we're here. Destroy your report. Stop the investigation. And this money is yours." Hosokawa's heart pounded with rage. He stood up and said, "You think you can buy me? You think I'd throw away everything I've worked for?" The man didn't flinch. "Dr. Hosokawa," he said calmly, "if you don't take this money, you won't just lose this opportunity. You'll lose your job. And let me assure you, no hospital in the country will ever hire you again." That's when it all became clear. Hosokawa realized his hospital was directly tied to the very company he was investigating, Japan Nitrogen Fertilizer Company. And this wasn't just any company. It was backed by one of Japan's most powerful zaibatsu, with deep ties to the government. No wonder the local authorities had done nothing. Under immense pressure, Hosokawa was forced to destroy his report. But one thing he refused to do was take the money. "These are my principles," he said firmly. "If I take your money, I'll lose more than my job. I'll lose my soul." In the days that followed, Hosokawa worked tirelessly at the hospital, watching more and more patients fall victim to the mysterious illness. He knew exactly what was causing it, but at the time, he couldn't say a word. The constant pressure weighed on him until he finally broke, both mentally and physically. Not long after, he fell seriously ill himself. A few years later, he stepped down from his position at the hospital. But did that mean the investigation ended there? Not even close. By 1959, Kumamoto University's medical department reached out to him. By then, Hosokawa had returned to his hometown, living quietly in another prefecture to recover. The university staff came to him and said, "We heard about the research you did years ago. Would you be willing to help us figure out what really happened?" Even though his health had deteriorated after years of illness and pain, Hosokawa didn't hesitate. He pushed through the agony, relying on his old notes and fading memories, to rewrite a comprehensive and detailed report. He handed it over to Kumamoto University. With Hosokawa's findings in hand, combined with their own research, the university published an explosive report. The news rocked Japan. Tens of thousands of people had suffered from this disease, and the truth was finally out. It was all because of the chemical plant. The residents of Mizuo village didn't waste any time. They formed the Victims Support Committee, banded together, and took the nitrogen fertilizer company to court. But the company flat out denied any responsibility. Their defense? "Your illness is caused by methylmercury poisoning, but our plant only uses liquid mercury. There's no connection." Worse still, the company attempted to obscure its actions by continuing waste disposal, while also trying to cover up the evidence. During this time, an American photographer, Eugene Smith, heard about the case. He traveled to Mizuo village to meet the victims, documenting their struggles through a series of powerful photographs. But those photos hit a nerve. The forces behind the chemical plant didn't want the truth exposed. They sent men to physically assault Smith, resulting in serious injuries, including the loss of vision in one eye. Even then, the victims didn't back down. Desperate for justice, they turned to Hosokawa again. "You were the first to uncover this illness," they pleaded. "You've seen it all from the beginning. We need you to testify." By this time, Hosokawa was in the final stages of lung cancer. His condition was critical. But he told them firmly, "As long as I'm breathing, I'll help you fight." From then on, he appeared in court again and again. Even as his health deteriorated further, he refused to stop. Finally, in March 1973, after years of relentless effort from the victims and their supporters, the court ruled in their favor. The nitrogen fertilizer company was ordered to compensate each victim 18 million yen, around $70,000 at the time. For many, it was a hard-fought victory. But just 3 months before the ruling was made public, Hosokawa passed away. His final testimony came from his hospital bed. Too weak to attend court, he had the judge and legal team visit him in his room. Even then, he gave his statement, fulfilling his promise to the victims. Hosokawa may not have spoken out in the beginning, but he spent the rest of his life making things right. He fought for justice, and his work became a beacon of hope for others. This tragedy eventually sparked global action. In 2013, the United Nations introduced the Minamata Convention, urging countries to reduce and phase out mercury-based products. The United States, along with many other nations, committed to eliminating mercury use, to protect both public health and the environment.